Kendrick Vale had been away from home for so long that he forgot how quiet the streets could feel just before dusk settled. The air was warm that evening, the kind of Texas warmth that wrapped around the skin instead of burning it. He had spent years in places where every step carried weight, where every sound had meaning. But tonight, he was simply a man returning to a place that built him long before the uniform ever did. He had flown home to see his parents, to sit at the same kitchen table where he once did homework, to listen to his father's deep, steady laugh, and to hear his mother fuss over him for not calling enough. He missed simple things: the smell of the grass, the echo of children riding bikes, the quiet. He thought this neighborhood would feel the same as it always did. For the most part, it did. Same trimmed lawns, same mailboxes, same slow-moving clouds drifting over the rooftops. But some changes are quiet, creeping, not noticeable until they stand directly in front of you and speak your name like they've been watching from the shadows. That change had a name: Clifford Harlan. Nobody had appointed Clifford to anything. Nobody had voted him in. Nobody trusted him with authority, but somehow he had given himself the job of neighborhood enforcer. The kind of man who believed the rules only mattered when he was the one delivering them. A clipboard, some laminated HOA papers, and most recently, a gun. He didn't wear it discreetly. He wore it the way some men wear trophies, on display. Kendrick had heard about him in passing. Calls from his mother, where she would describe Clifford leaving notes on cars, telling teenagers to go inside before sunset, barking at delivery drivers like they were trespassing. It had sounded annoying, but harmless. A neighborhood nuisance. The sort of man everyone tolerated out of habit more than respect. Kendrick didn't think Clifford would become anything more than a story to laugh about. But that was before tonight. After dinner, Kendrick slipped on a light jacket and laced up his running shoes. Not for training, not for discipline, just to feel the familiar rhythm of his feet against the pavement, to let his breath settle into a pace and his mind drift. The sun was lowering itself slowly, painting the sky orange and gold. It felt peaceful. Until it didn't. He didn't notice Clifford at first. Not until he stepped from behind two parked cars, like a shadow breaking loose from the rest. The streetlight caught the metal at his hip, too visible, too ready. "Hey!" Clifford's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "What are you doing here?" Kendrick slowed to a stop, the cool air filling his lungs. The tone wasn't curious. It wasn't cautious. It was accusatory, sharp, loud enough for porches to take notice. He answered calmly, "Just jogging." Clifford took a step closer. "This is a private neighborhood. You don't just move around here after dark." Kendrick felt it then. The shift. The way Clifford's eyes scanned him. The tension in his posture. The confidence of someone who believed the gun at his hip made him correct before the conversation even began. "I live here," Kendrick replied. "My parents live 3 streets down." But Clifford didn't back down. If anything, the words seemed to irritate him more. "Don't play these games with me," he snapped. "Name, address, now." There was no logic behind it. No reason. Just ego wearing a holster. Kendrick could feel the moment tightening, like air being squeezed out of the night. Years of discipline kept his voice steady, his hands loose and visible. He didn't step forward. He didn't escalate. He didn't need to. "I'm just trying to get home," he said softly. But Clifford didn't want calm. He didn't want truth. He wanted control. "You don't look like you live here," Clifford said, his jaw tightening. "You look like trouble looking for a reason." The words hung there, poisonous and familiar. The kind of sentence that wasn't about the rules of a neighborhood, but the quiet, ugly rules some men carried in their minds. From across the street, a porch light flicked on. A neighbor, an older woman Kendrick recognized, stepped outside, her terrier tugging on its leash. She stared at the scene for only a second before recognition widened her eyes. "Kendrick," she called, "is that you?" Clifford didn't turn toward her. He didn't respond. He didn't want clarity. He wanted the story he already believed. Kendrick raised his voice slightly so she could hear. "Evening, Mrs. Denning. Just on a run." She nodded quickly, pointing toward Clifford. "Cliff, put that thing away. That's the Vale boy. He grew up here. You know that." But Clifford hated being corrected, especially publicly. "Ma'am," he barked, not looking at her. "Go back inside. I have this under control." The dog yelped, startled. Mrs. Denning stepped back. Kendrick saw the shift. Not in the neighborhood, no, in Clifford. This man wasn't just suspicious, he was angry. His power was being questioned, his authority challenged in front of witnesses. He wasn't just holding a gun, he was tempted to use it. Kendrick's voice dropped to a low, steady tone, a tone he had used in places far from quiet neighborhoods, places where decisions had consequences. "You don't want to do this," he said. "I'm not a threat. I'm just going home." But Clifford's hand hovered closer to the grip, like the weapon was pulling him toward a choice he wasn't prepared to make. Somewhere down the block, blinds shifted, windows opened. People were watching, people were listening. Kendrick didn't move. Clifford didn't either. The quiet neighborhood, once familiar and safe, now felt like a line drawn in dust. One man standing still, the other holding an entire street hostage with nothing but pride and a loaded weapon. The night was far from over, and the next moment would change everything. The street had become a stage without anyone agreeing to watch. Curtains of night settled over roofs and porches. Each window, a small square of light. Each shadow, a place for fear to grow if someone allowed it. Kendrick stood still. Clifford stood stubborn. The gun at his hip was not yet in his hand, but his pride had already drawn it. Across the road, Mrs. Denning hovered by her porch, with the leash wrapped around her wrist twice, torn between going inside, like she'd been told, and staying where her voice might still protect a boy she'd watched grow up. Kendrick kept his palms visible, fingers loose at his sides, shoulders relaxed, the way you keep them when you know someone's nerves are searching for a reason. He didn't speak for a moment. He let the silence breathe, because silence can disarm a man who's waiting for a shout to justify his next move. A car turned into the cul-de-sac, headlights washing the scene in harsh white. The engine idled, then clicked off. The door opened and a familiar figure stepped out. Mr. Vale, Kendrick's father. He had that quiet, steady posture he'd carried his whole life. The kind of presence that asks no one for permission. He didn't run. He walked, measured, calm, one hand lifted in a gentle, open gesture. "Kendrick," he said, voice even. "You all right, son?" Kendrick didn't take his eyes off Clifford. "I'm fine." Clifford's jaw moved like a gear catching. "Sir, return to your vehicle," he snapped. Tone too sharp for a man with no badge. "This is an HOA compliance matter." Mr. Vale stopped 3 paces away, turned his head slightly, and took a long look at the holstered gun. "Compliance?" he repeated. "With what law?" Clifford's chin lifted. "Neighborhood safety, curfew for non-residents, loitering." Denning called from the porch, cooage gathering like warm breath on a cold window. "And there is no curfew." A second voice joined, Mr. Harrow from the corner house. "Put your hand away from that weapon, Cliff. That boy's parents have lived here longer than you've had that clipboard." Clifford's eyes flickered, the crowd forming without his consent. Authority loves a private room. It hates witnesses. His fingers twitched near the grip, then thought better of it. Kendrick finally spoke, the same even tone he'd used with men in hotter places with worse intentions. "I'm going to take 3 steps backward to my father," he said. "Then I'm going home. No one needs to prove anything tonight." Clifford's voice cracked at the edges. "You don't give orders here." "I'm not giving an order," Kendrick said. "I'm giving you a way out that lets everyone sleep." He took the first slow step. Clifford's shoulders tightened. The second. Clifford swallowed. The third. Kendrick now stood beside his father. The small distance, collapsing something ugly that had been swelling in the air. "Let's go," Mr. Vale murmured. They turned. Clifford, grasping at the shredded threads of control, called out, "Name and address. Final time." Mr. Vale pivoted halfway, soft smile in his voice. "Ask kindly," he said, "and maybe you'll get kindness back." Clifford's mouth opened, but the reply didn't come. The script he'd written for himself didn't have this scene in it. A son standing tall, without threat. A father refusing to bow without raising his voice. Neighbors refusing to pretend this was normal. Kendrick and his father started walking. The sound of their footsteps on asphalt, steady, unhurried, became the loudest thing on the street. They reached the sidewalk that fed into their block. Mr. Vale didn't speak for 10 steps. Then he said, "Breathe." Kendrick exhaled, a long, quiet release he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "He would have done it," Mr. Vale said softly. "Not because he had to, because he didn't know what else to do with the power he gave himself." Kendrick nodded once. "I know." They turned the corner and the night loosened its grip. Porch lights dimmed behind them. The world regained its ordinary shape, the kind that keeps a person whole. Inside the house, Mrs. Vale stood by the front window with the curtain barely parted. When the men stepped in, her shoulders dropped and her eyes closed for a moment of gratitude that no one could see, but both of them felt. "You okay?" she asked, hands already guiding Kendrick toward the kitchen table, like she had when he was 10 and scraped a knee on the sidewalk. "I'm fine," he said. "It's handled." But it wasn't. Not really. A moment had passed without breaking, but the crack remained, thin, bright, undeniable. They sat. The kitchen clock clicked on the wall. The sound of normal life is sometimes the most healing thing in the world. Mr. Vale poured water into 3 glasses. "Clifford Harlan's been puffing himself up around here for months," he said calmly. "Telling delivery drivers where to park. Measuring grass with a ruler like righteousness can be counted in inches." Mrs. Vale's jaw tightened. "I told the HOA we're tired of his harassment. They said he's acting within guidelines." Kendrick rubbed his thumb along the condensation of his glass. "Guidelines don't give a man a gun and the permission to aim his temper at people." His mother's eyes shone. "It is good that you were the one he found tonight. Not a kid, not a stranger." Kendrick thought about the way Clifford's hand hovered over the holster. A handful of inches. A handful of pride. A handful of neighbors watching from windows and porches. It didn't take much to turn a street into a headline. "I'll go talk to him in the morning," Mr. Vale said. "Man to man." Kendrick shook his head. "No, he doesn't hear men. He hears challenges." He looked up at both of them. "We'll do this the right way. We'll start with the board, in the light." The doorbell rang. All 3 glanced at each other. Mr. Vale went to the door and opened it halfway. Standing there was Deputy Rowan, a broad-shouldered woman with calm eyes and the posture of someone who knows how to cool a room without speaking. Kendrick recognized her from years back. She'd been the officer who guided kids across traffic during a 4th of July parade, laughing with them as if there were nothing in the world to fear. "Evening," she said, voice low. "We had a call, noise complaint, possible disturbance." I drove through, and it looks like everything's calm. "It is," Mr. Vale replied. "Thank you for checking." Rowan's gaze slid to Kendrick. "You all right?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded. "Good. We've had a few calls about Mr. Harlan lately. Nothing that sticks, but enough that I keep an eye out. If he approaches again, and you feel unsafe, please call us first. Do not try to reason with pride and mettle." Kendrick almost smiled. "I won't." Rowan tipped her head, then added, "And for what it's worth, a lot of folks know your face around here. Memory is a better ID than any card in your wallet." She gave a small wave and stepped back into the night. The door closed. The house felt safer just because a steady person had stood at its threshold and named the truth out loud. They didn't talk much after that. Sometimes love is letting the night end without squeezing it for more answers. Kendrick showered, the hot water washing away the cold residue of adrenaline. He lay in his old room, the same squeak in the ceiling fan, the same scuff on the dresser that had never been fixed. He watched the movement of tree shadows outside drift across the wall and listened to the quiet settle around him like a blanket. Sleep didn't come quickly, but it came. Morning did what morning always does. It made everything look honest. Sunlight doesn't lie. It just shows what's there. Kendrick jogged again, earlier this time, when the sky was still pearl and the birds were just deciding on their first notes. He took a different route, long and wide, letting his lungs work and his legs remember. The town felt small in the best way. The bakery setting out its first trays, the school crossing guard leaning on a cone, the old man with the red cap sweeping a sidewalk he'd been sweeping for 20 years. When he turned back into his parents' street, he saw something that stopped him. A small group had gathered near the mail kiosk. Mrs. Denning, Mr. Harrow, the young couple from the duplex, Mrs. Cruz with her toddler on her hip. They weren't whispering. They were talking. Normal tones, open hands, eyebrows knit with concern rather than gossip. They waved him over. "We're going to the HOA meeting tonight," Mrs. Denning said without preamble. "We're tired of pretending this is fine." Mr. Harrow nodded. Cliff's been daring someone to say no to him for months. He picked the wrong man last night, but someone else won't be so steady. The young father spoke up. "He yelled at my wife for unloading groceries by the curb. My kid started crying. That's not community." Mrs. Cruz shifted the toddler and looked Kendrick in the eyes. "If I bring my voice and you bring your calm, maybe the rest will bring their courage." Kendrick felt it. That small wind that moves before a storm, not of destruction, but of change. He nodded. "I'll be there." He jogged home slowly, heart beating a new rhythm. When he reached the porch, his mother was watering the potted fern she kept by the rail. She raised an eyebrow he knew too well. "Well?" she asked. "They're coming tonight," he said. "Not for me. For themselves." She smiled at the fern like it had finally decided to grow. "Good," she said. "Sometimes neighborhoods just need a mirror." He looked down the street, the same mailboxes, the same lawns, the same sky, and understood that nothing monumental had happened yet. And yet everything had begun, not because a man with a gun had been stopped, but because ordinary people had decided the quiet would belong to them again. The days stretched forward, patient and bright. Somewhere down another block, a single hammer struck wood, the soft rhythm of someone building something true. Tonight would not be easy. Clifford would not arrive alone. He would bring pages and fury and men who prefer authority to accountability. But Kendrick had learned something in rooms far away, and in kitchens like this one. When truth stands up, it doesn't need to shout. It needs to keep standing. And he intended to. Daylight settled slowly across the neighborhood, the kind of soft morning light that made fences glow and lawns look greener than they were. But beneath that easy brightness was a day that hummed with quiet tension. Every porch, every driveway, every window carried the faint memory of the night before. Kendrick spent his morning helping his mother wash vegetables, fold laundry, and sweep the back patio. Ordinary tasks, grounding tasks, the kind that remind a person who they are before the world tries to tell them otherwise. His father worked silently on a wooden chair leg he'd been repairing for weeks, sanding it slowly until it felt smooth enough to carry a name. No one spoke about Clifford. No one needed to, but the town spoke for them. By noon, whispers had stretched into conversations, conversations into opinions, and opinions into resolve. Some agreed with Clifford. Some were confused. Some were embarrassed that they had allowed such a man to hold the neighborhood in a quiet chokehold for months. But most were just tired of one person deciding the tone of their lives. Around 1 in the afternoon, Kendrick's childhood friend, Jacob, lighter-skinned, tall, goofy smile, once too big for his face, but now perfectly at home, knocked at the door. Kendrick hadn't seen him in years, but time hadn't dimmed the familiarity. Jacob hugged him like the years had only been minutes. "You really back home, huh?" Jacob said, stepping inside, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Should have known you'd bring a hurricane with you." Kendrick smirked. Didn't bring it, just walked into it. Jacob sat at the kitchen table and poured himself a glass of lemonade. "Whole neighborhood's talking about last night. Cliff's been barking for so long, folks forgot they didn't have to listen." Kendrick leaned against the counter. "He's not just barking, he's looking for someone to bite." Jacob nodded. His expression shifted, serious, thoughtful. "And you were the wrong dog to bare teeth at." Kendrick didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence spoke for him. Jacob continued. "He's already rounding up his committee. Not the real HOA. The little pack he thinks gives him authority." Of course Clifford would. He wasn't going to let the neighborhood remember itself without a fight. Kendrick exhaled slowly. Tonight's meeting needs clarity, calm, strength. No shouting, no anger, just truth. Jacob took a sip, nodding. "Then it's a good thing you're the one walking in with the truth." The day drifted forward. The kind of slow movement that felt like walking to the edge of something large. Kendrick showered, shaved, and dressed with quiet hands, a navy shirt, clean jeans, shoes that made no sound when he walked. His father stood nearby and adjusted the collar with the same touch he'd used when Kendrick was a teenager preparing for graduation. "You don't go to win," his father said quietly. "You go to remind." Kendrick understood. His mother placed a hand on his chest, a gesture that meant stay yourself, stay whole, stay safe. He nodded once. As evening crept in, the sky turned honey gold, then deepened into warm purple shadows. Lights clicked on one by one across the street, like fireflies deciding to gather. The HOA meeting was held in the Community Recreational Hall, a low brick building with a wide door and too many folding chairs. Kendrick walked with his parents on either side of him. Jacob and his wife a few steps behind. Neighbors emerged from driveways, fell into step, and joined the quiet procession. When they entered the hall, Clifford was already there. He stood near the front, like a man guarding a throne that didn't belong to him. That same clipboard, that same tight jaw, that same holstered gun, shining just enough to remind everyone what was really being carried into the room. Around him sat the people he had chosen for himself. 3 men who liked being loud, 2 women who liked being right, and a teenage son who sat silently, looking embarrassed to be there. The official HOA board sat separately, stiff-backed, uncomfortable. They knew tonight wasn't about landscaping violations. The air inside was thick, not with noise, but with the weight of unspoken things. Kendrick and his parents took seats near the middle. Jacob sat beside him. Mrs. Denning, Mr. Harrow, and the young couple filled the row behind. More families trickled in until the room felt full. Clifford cleared his throat and began, not waiting for the board to speak. "We're here," he announced loudly, "to address a security concern from last night. This neighborhood has rules. Rules I have been enforcing for everyone's safety. And when someone acts suspicious..." He looked at Kendrick. Kendrick didn't flinch. Clifford continued, "We have to treat that behavior seriously. We can't have unknown individuals walking the streets after dark." A hand rose from the board. Barbara Newen, HOA chairwoman, spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Mr. Harlan, before you continue, the person you're referring to is Mr. Kendrick Vale, who has lived in this neighborhood since childhood. His parents have been homeowners here for more than 20 years. Clifford's face tightened, but he didn't stop. He wasn't recognized, Clifford argued. Rules are rules, and for safety, identification. Mrs. Denning stood. "Safety is not the issue," she said. "Fear is. Fear you started, Cliff, and fear you want to keep going." Murmurs stirred through the room. Clifford snapped. "I am trying to protect this neighborhood." Kendrick rose slowly. No rush, no sharpness, just presence. His voice was low, calm, and carried like someone speaking across water. "Protecting a neighborhood means knowing that the people who live in it belong," he said. "It means understanding the difference between concern and control, between safety and power." The room quieted into stillness. Kendrick continued, "Last night I wasn't approached as a neighbor. I was challenged as an enemy. I wasn't spoken to. I was accused. I wasn't questioned. I was judged." He paused, not on my actions, but on my appearance. Clifford's jaw clenched. "No one mentioned appearance. You didn't have to," Kendrick replied softly. "Your hand was on your gun before I said a word." Silence. Heavy. Sharp. The kind of silence where truth lands like a stone dropped in still water. One of the community officers at the back, off duty, attending as a resident, stood. "No civilian in this neighborhood should be approaching another resident with a weapon," he said. "That's not security. That's escalation." Several heads nodded. Clifford bristled. "If we stop enforcing standards, this place becomes chaos." Barbara Wynne spoke again, firm. "The only chaos here was the situation you created." Her voice was not loud, but it didn't need to be. Then she said the sentence the whole room was waiting for. "Effective immediately. Mr. Harlan is removed from all enforcement activities. He no longer represents the HOA in any capacity." A sound rose. Relief. Not cheering. Not clapping. Just breathing. Like the room had been holding its lungs closed for months. Clifford looked around and realized no one was standing with him. Not tonight. Not anymore. His face tightened. Not anger. Not even shame. Just the hollow look of a man who finally recognized the limits of the power he'd imagined himself to have. He left the room. No one followed. Kendrick sat back down slowly, not victorious, just steady, just present, just himself. The storm wasn't loud. The storm was quiet. And the neighborhood had finally decided who they wanted to be. The meeting ended, but its echo stayed long after the door closed. People lingered outside the community hall, not to gossip, not to stir trouble, but to breathe. The quiet kind of breathing that comes when a weight lifts all at once, leaving the chest unfamiliar with its own freedom. Kendrick stepped outside into the cool night air. His mother slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, not as someone needing reassurance, but as someone offering it. His father walked beside him with the easy stride of a man who has seen storms and knows when one has finally turned. But peace, when it returns, doesn't always land cleanly. Sometimes it comes with an aftershock. As the crowd began to disperse, a voice called out, not sharp, not loud, but strained, "Wait." Kendrick turned. Clifford's son stood near the walkway. He couldn't have been more than 17. Too young to have seen much of life. Too old not to understand what just happened. He looked like he'd grown an inch too fast. Shoulders not yet broad enough to carry the weight being placed on them. He didn't approach aggressively. He didn't posture. He didn't glare. He just looked tired. "Can we talk?" the boy asked. Kendrick nodded. The boy stepped away from the hall, out toward the sidewalk, where the street lamps cast long shadows. "My dad," the boy started, then stopped. He dragged a sleeve across his forehead, searching for the right shape of the words. "He's not always like that." Kendrick didn't respond. The boy continued. His voice cracked. He swallowed. "He lost his job last year. And before that, my mom left. And he's just been trying to be someone, trying to matter." The honesty was small, but heavy. Kendrick understood it. Pain sometimes turns inward, but sometimes it leaks outward instead, looking for something to hold, even if it crushes what it grabs. The boy's shoulders shook once, almost imperceptibly. "He shouldn't have treated you like that. I know that. Everybody knows that. I think even he knows that, deep down." He took a breath. "I just didn't want you to think he's only the worst parts." Kendrick let silence stretch. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then he said, gently, "Trying to matter doesn't give a man the right to make others feel small." The boy nodded, once slowly. Kendrick placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Light, steady. "You are not your father's shadow," he said. "Whatever he struggles with, you don't have to inherit it. You get to choose who you become." The boy's voice wavered. "I don't want to be like him." Kendrick gave a small, real smile. "Then you won't be." For the first time that evening, the boy breathed like himself. He walked away with his head lower, but his spine straighter. The Fails walked home under streetlights humming softly. The world felt softer now, like the night had gentled itself. Inside, the kitchen lights were warm. Kendrick sat with a plate of leftovers and the familiar comfort of clinking silverware and quiet conversation. His mother told stories to distract the house from the evening's strain. Stories of Kendrick's childhood mishaps, spilled lemonade, bicycle crashes, scraped knees bandaged with tape and love. His father chuckled, low and steady. Life, even in the wake of conflict, found ways to remind them that peace was still possible. After dinner, Kendrick stepped out to the front porch, leaning against the wooden railing that still smelled faintly of summer paint. The cicadas had begun their nightly chorus, rhythmic and unbothered. Jacob joined him, 2 glasses of iced tea in hand. You handled that thing, like you've been breaking apart tension since birth, Jacob said, leaning on the opposite post. Kendrick shook his head. No, just learn to choose where to place my voice. Jacob nodded slowly. You know, people felt something in that room. They remembered each other. That doesn't happen much anymore. Kendrick didn't respond, but his silence held agreement. Jacob sipped his tea and sighed. But you know he's not done, right? Kendrick finally turned slightly. No, he said, he's not. Because men whose identity is built on dominance do not fall quietly. They unravel. And Clifford would unravel before he let go of control. The next morning began calmer. Kendrick ran again, not to outrun anything, but to return to rhythm. People waved this time. People smiled. People stepped outside just to see him pass. Recognition. Restoration. Belonging. But near the end of his route, he saw something that stilled him. Clifford's truck sat parked at the neighborhood exit, not blocking. Not waiting. Just there. Clifford sat inside, leaning forward, elbows on the wheel. He wasn't holding the gun. He wasn't leaning back in arrogance. He looked small in a way he never allowed himself to be seen. His eyes lifted and met Kendrick's. No words were spoken. None were needed. For the first time, Clifford saw Kendrick. Not as a threat, not as an opponent, not as a man he had to control. Just as a person who refused to break. Kendrick nodded once. Not forgiveness, recognition. Clifford didn't nod back, but he didn't look away. Sometimes the beginning of change is nothing more than the moment someone finally sees what they've become. Later that day, Mrs. Denning stopped Kendrick as he passed her house. Her dog, tail wagging, circled his ankles like it remembered him from childhood summers. She placed a hand gently on his forearm. You didn't just stop something last night, she said softly. You returned something. You gave this place its voice back. Kendrick looked out at the street, the same sidewalk, same trees, same fences, but everything felt more open now. I didn't do it alone, he said. No, she agreed. You just reminded us how to stand. That evening, Kendrick sat on the porch with his parents. The sun set slowly, turning the sky into layers of gold resting over soft violet. Crickets began to sing. The neighborhood breathed. His father spoke, voice rough with quiet pride. You didn't come back to fix the world, but you fixed something here. Kendrick looked toward the horizon. I didn't fix anything, he said. I just refused to be moved. His mother reached over and rested her hand on his. Sometimes, she said, that is the exact thing the world needs. And the night settled gently over them, as if peace had always known how to find its way home. The neighborhood began to breathe differently over the next few days. Not loudly, not triumphantly. Just easier. People watered their lawns slower. They lingered longer in conversation. Kids played basketball in the driveway again, without looking over their shoulders. The kind of peace that had gone missing, without anyone noticing, had finally returned. Quiet, familiar, like a childhood memory, finding its way home. But peace doesn't erase tension. It just settles over it like dust, waiting to be disturbed. And change, real change, has aftershocks. Clifford's house sat at the far end of the street, blinds drawn, driveway empty. His truck hadn't moved for 2 days. Neighbors avoided the house, not out of fear, but out of something softer, something complicated. Pity, confusion, relief. A community isn't free the moment the aggressor falls. It becomes free when it learns what to do with the silence afterward. One afternoon, Kendrick walked down the block, carrying a bag of groceries for Mrs. Cruz. Her toddler clapped happily as he entered, babbling in the unfiltered language only children get to speak. The house smelled of warm soup and laundry detergent. Simple, comforting things. Smiling tiredly. "I know," Kendrick replied, "but I wanted to." When he stepped back outside, the sky was beginning to soften into early evening light. He walked home slow, letting the rhythm of the street settle into him. On his way, he saw a familiar figure sitting on a porch. Mrs. Denning, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a gardening magazine that looked older than he was. She didn't look up right away. When she did, she didn't ask questions. She simply said, "You carry peace quietly. Your father does too." Kendrick sat on the porch steps beside her. She continued, voice like warmth. "That's a rare thing, to be strong without needing to be loud." Kendrick smiled softly. "I learned from good people." She nodded. "Your mother and father love you deeply. You can feel it in the way they look at you." For a moment, the world was gentle. Then the screen door behind them creaked open. "Evening," said a voice. Kendrick turned, and his chest tightened for just a moment. Clifford stood at the edge of the sidewalk. Not puffed up, not bracing for confrontation, not holding the weight of self-made power. He looked human. Tired, carrying something heavy inside him. Denning stood slowly, gave Kendrick's shoulder a supportive squeeze, and stepped inside, leaving the two men alone beneath the fading light. The cicadas hummed. Kendrick didn't speak first. Clifford swallowed, searching for words that didn't exist in any handbook. "I wasn't raised to think I mattered unless I was in charge," he said. "My father was the kind of man you didn't argue with. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just decided." He looked at the ground. "I thought that's what being strong was." Kendrick listened quietly. Clifford continued. "When people stopped listening to me at work, when my marriage fell apart, when the house felt too quiet." His breath shook once. It felt like I was disappearing. He looked up, eyes tired, voice bare. "I didn't know how to exist without control." Kendrick spoke softly. "You tried to build your identity out of authority. But authority without connection isn't strength. It's distance." Clifford nodded once, like the truth had finally found him. "I almost hurt you," he said. "And that's something I have to sit with." There was no excuse in the words, no defense. Just accountability. And that mattered. Kendrick didn't absolve him. He didn't offer forgiveness. He simply said, "I'm still here, and no one got hurt." That's a place to start. Clifford breathed out. Not relief, not release, but recognition. He nodded again, almost to himself. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he walked away. Not defeated, just beginning. Later that night, Kendrick sat with his parents in the living room. The TV played softly, some cooking show none of them were really paying attention to. The kind of quiet evening that feels like a house exhaling. His father spoke without looking away from the screen. "You handled that boy right." Kendrick frowned slightly. "Clifford's older than me." His father shook his head. "I meant his son," Kendrick swallowed. Because he understood then. The real danger had never been the gun, or the shouting, or the authority. It was the inheritance of harm. The way pain passes from one generation to the next, if someone doesn't stand still and say, "It stops here." Kendrick didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room held the truth gently. The next morning was bright, clear. The kind of day where the sunlight feels like a blessing instead of a spotlight. Kendrick jogged again, but this time, children waved at him. Neighbors called his name. Dogs barked happily. A teenager down the block nodded at him like a silent thank you had passed between them. As he came back home, his mother stood on the porch, watering her plants. She watched him approach, face soft with knowing. "You didn't come home to change anything," she said. Kendrick stepped up the stairs. "No," he replied. "The neighborhood changed itself. I just didn't move." She smiled, proud, warm, steady. That's how real strength works. The wind moved through the trees. The world felt right-sized again. And the story wasn't about conflict anymore. It was about healing. Not loud, not dramatic, just real, just earned, just lived. The neighborhood didn't change overnight. It didn't transform into some perfect, conflict-free place where everyone suddenly understood each other. That isn't how growth works. Real change is slower, quieter, like grass growing back after a fire. The burn marks still there, but life returning anyway. In the days that followed, things settled into a new rhythm. Kendrick woke early each morning and jogged his usual route. Children waved, neighbors nodded. People who had once kept their curtains half closed stepped out into the sunlight a little sooner. It wasn't just that Clifford stopped enforcing rules. It was that everyone finally realized they didn't have to be afraid anymore. Fear had walked these streets for months. Now it had nowhere left to stand. One late morning, Kendrick worked alongside his father in the garage, sanding the frame of an old porch swing they'd always planned to restore. The wood dust floated like gold dust in the sunlight, soft and warm. The work was easy, steady, the kind you feel in your hands more than your mind. "Feels like home again," Kendrick said quietly. His father didn't look up, just nodded, a slow, thoughtful nod. "It was always home," he replied. "It just forgot how to sound like it." That landed deeply. Kendrick's father had a way of speaking like the ground itself had taught him how. They continued working. No rush, no tension. The sound of sandpaper against wood filling the space between them. Moments like that are rare in life. Ordinary moments. Sacred moments. The ones that become memory long after bigger events fade. Maya, their neighbor from across the way, stopped by with lemonade. Real citrus, not the powdered kind. She leaned against the doorframe, sipping slowly. "You two look like a postcard," she teased. Kendrick chuckled. "Feels better than getting interrogated on the sidewalk." "That's an improvement," she said, smiling softly. But then her expression shifted, more thoughtful now. "You know, people are different around here because of you." Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "I didn't do anything special." Maya shook her head gently. "You didn't yell, you didn't threaten, you didn't break. You just stood." His father paused his sanding, eyes lowering, but there was something proud there. "That's harder than anything," Maya said. "People act like strength is loud, but the strongest thing I've ever seen is someone who stays themselves when someone tries to shake them. Planting flowers and vegetables no one particularly needed, but everyone loved. Clifford was there. Not standing tall, not barking orders, kneeling. Quiet, digging a small hole for a flowering shrub, his hands moving slow, careful. His son was beside him, watering freshly planted soil. There was no audience, no clipboard, no gun. Just two people working. Kendrick didn't walk past. He didn't turn away. He approached. For a moment, both men simply existed in the same quiet air. Clifford didn't stand. He didn't speak first. He finished patting the soil, brushed his hands clean, sat back on his heels. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. Kendrick nodded once, not to encourage, just to acknowledge. Clifford continued. "When you live your life thinking control means safety, you forget how to let anything grow. He looked at the garden. At some point, I stopped seeing neighbors. I just saw territory. Kendrick's voice was soft. People can lose themselves. It doesn't mean they can't find their way back. Clifford exhaled, like he'd been waiting for permission to breathe again. My son deserves better than the man I was, he said. Kendrick didn't answer with forgiveness. He answered with truth. Then show him. Clifford nodded. Not dramatic, not emotional, just real. Sometimes redemption isn't an apology. It's effort. That evening, Kendrick sat on the back porch with his mother, watching the fireflies flicker like stars that had decided to drop down for a while. You're leaving soon, she said. Not asking, stating. He nodded slowly. I have to go back. I have responsibilities. People waiting on me. She smiled, proud, sad, strong. You came home for a reason, she said, but the reason wasn't the conflict. Kendrick looked at her. It was to remember who you are. She took his hand. And now you're ready to carry that back with you. The cicadas sang. The breeze smoothed itself over the yard. The night held steady. Home was not where a person lived. Home was where a person was seen. And Kendrick had been seen, not as what the world assumed, not as a threat, not as a uniform, not as someone to fear, just as Kendrick, just as himself. The last morning came quietly. The sun lifted itself over the rooftops with a kind of unhurried grace, as though it knew not to rush this day. Kendrick zipped up his duffel bag slowly, folding each shirt with deliberate hands. Not because he needed to, but because leaving deserved its own kind of care. His parents moved through the house softly too, as if sound itself could break the moment. There were no long speeches, no dramatic tears, just presence. Steady, warm, familiar. His father carried the bag to the front door and set it beside the frame. His mother stepped over and smoothed the shoulder of Kendrick's jacket, even though it didn't need smoothing. You came home, she said, not as a question, but as a completed circle. Kendrick nodded. I needed to. She cupped his face in her palms, the same way she did when he was 10. And when the world gets loud again, remember, you belong to yourself before you belong to anything else. He closed his eyes, memorized the moment, held it. Then the porch door creaked open. The neighborhood was waiting. Not everyone, not a crowd, just those who mattered. Mrs. Denning and her yapping terrier. Jacob and his wife standing under the shade of their oak. Mr. Harrow with his folded newspaper tucked under one arm. Maya, hands in her pockets, leaning against her truck. And farther down the sidewalk, not close, not intruding, Clifford and his son. Not hiding, not pretending. Present, changed, but not finished. There was no speech, no applause, no thank you for your service. Just nods. The language of respect, spoken by those who have seen truth, not just heard it. Kendrick walked down the steps, duffel over his shoulder. He paused when he reached the bottom. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. His voice carried anyway. This neighborhood doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to the people who wake up here, who live here, who look out for each other. Not a declaration, a reminder. He turned to leave, but Mrs. Denning called out. You'll visit? Kendrick smiled. Small, real, certain, always. He stepped into the truck beside his father. The engine rumbled to life, steady as a heartbeat. As they pulled away, neighbors didn't wave goodbye like endings. They waved like continuity, like roots, like home. The houses grew smaller behind him, but the feeling didn't fade. Because home wasn't leaving him. He was carrying it now. And wherever he went next, the quiet strength he'd remembered here. The kind his father had lived, the kind his mother had taught, the kind he himself had chosen. would go with him. The world outside would be loud again. But he knew how to stand now. Not by force, not by anger, not by authority. By presence, by calm, by truth. Strength is not who shouts the loudest. Strength is who stays themselves when the world tries to shake them. You don't have to fight every battle. You just have to refuse to move for the wrong ones. When you know who you are, no one can tell you who to be. Fade out, slow music, black screen.